Okay, welcome back to part 2 of our notes here for section 1.4 functions. So we got to find the domain of each function. We're going to also find range so we can get practice. So for this one, domain, we're going to write it this way. It's like a little bracket brace, if you want to think of it that way. I'm writing this symbol down here. So our domain are just our x values. So we got -3, -1, 0, 2, 4. And then we're also going to find our range for each of these just to practice. We should know how to find range too. So our range is 0, 4, 2, 2, -1. I'm not going to write 2 twice. I'm only going to write it once. And I'm going to try to write it in order, in increasing order. So -1, and I had a 2, a 4, and a 0, then I got a 0, then I got a 2, I got a 4. This is a function because the x values, even though there are 2 2's for the range, the x values don't repeat. They don't violate the function. Okay? So now over here we got to find our domain. So what am I allowed to plug in? When I see equations like down here, I can graph it, but I think about what am I allowed to plug in or what am I not allowed to plug in. So what am I not allowed to plug in here? Well, there's a 1 on the top, so nothing's going to happen there. The bottom. Anytime I have a fraction, I think about what can I not plug in to make the bottom 0. I can't plug in -5. We can't have -5. That's not part of our domain, but it's everything else. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use parentheses, negative infinity, because I can plug in a huge negative number, -1 billion, and it's okay. Comma. Where can I go to? I can go to -5. I can't plug in -5, and that's why we use a parenthesis. If I could plug in -5, then I would put a bracket here. But I can't plug in -5. You can't, well, what you would say, why don't I put -4? What about -4.3? Or what about those kind of numbers? What about -4.9? Some students will say, what about that? Well, what about -4.99? Isn't that, so we exclude that number. So what you want to do, whatever number you're excluding, you write it down and then put a parenthesis. And then from our notes, anytime you have more than 1, because we don't just stop at -5, we're going to keep going. So this means union, means or, okay? So we're going to do -5, because -5 is the only number that's excluded. So what this means is you can plug in anything below -5, anything above -5. You just can't plug in -5. And then where does it go to? Well, it goes forever. So that's our domain. Our range, again, we got to think up and down for range, up and down. So you can't plug in -5. Okay, so look at the top. Could you get a big number out of this, like 1 divided by a really, really small number? And I can get a big number out of this. 1 divided by a really, really, really small number, I get a big number. I can get a really big negative number. What can't you get? Well, the fact that there's a 1 on the top of this fraction, you're never going to get it to be 0. 1 divided by a billion is still going to not be 0. So you can't get 0. So for my range, I can get really small numbers. I can't get 0. And I can get really, really big numbers. Again, if you were plugging them in. Okay? So let's look at the calculator on this. So that was algebraically thinking about it. Let's go to the calculator and graph this. So what was it? 1 divided by, I'm going to use parentheses here, x plus 5. We graph it. And there's your graph. Now what I want you to notice is this, it doesn't stop. It goes up forever. Our calculator or our computer screen is not a nice LCD, beautiful TV that's 70 inches. Yeah, we don't have that. So it does go up forever. This goes down forever. This goes forever left. This goes forever right. So the only thing that's missing is in here. Kind of like a T. So what is missing left and right? So if I go left, what's missing here? That's negative 5. So that's why it's excluded in our domain. Up and down wise, what's missing? 0. Notice it never crosses the x-axis. It gets really, really, really close. So that's why that is our domain and range. Okay? So if we come down here, let's just focus this one. What can I get out of a square root? Or what am I allowed to plug in? So for our domain, I can't plug in things into a square root that are going to make it negative. So my algebra method, set this equal to 0, because I can get a square root to be 0, but I can't get it to be negative. So if I solve for x, I get x equals 4/3. So I can plug in 4/3. That's going to be 0. Can I plug in numbers bigger or smaller than 4/3? Well, try it. Plug in 0. 0 is always an easy number. If you plug in 0, does that work okay? Yes. So what you can do, you can plug in, for our domain, you can plug in anything, anything smaller than 4/3 all the way up to 4/3, including 4/3. But I can't plug in, if you want to plug in 10, plug in 10, this is negative 30. 4 minus negative 30 is negative 26. You can't take the square root of negative 26. And anytime you have a square root, our range is almost always going to be, unless there's a number here or a negative here, it's always going to be 0, including to infinity. I was using my range to figure out my domain, actually. Okay? Make sense? All right. For this one, they're kind of telling us our domain. They've restricted it for us. If they cover this up, if I had a way to just blank this out, then our domain would be all real numbers. But they're telling us our domain has to be greater than 0. Why is that? Because a radius can't be negative. So my domain, having pen issues here. Here we go. Our domain is 0 to infinity. And then our range, the volume, is going to be the same. You can't have a volume that's 0, but you can have an infinite volume. You never put a bracket around infinity or negative infinity. So there's not much to think about there. All right. We're going to approach letter E by using the calculator. So sometimes we'll use a calculator to start, and it's helpful. And sometimes we'd rather do it by hand. So what do we have? The square root of 4 minus x squared. So let's graph that bad boy. Okay, so for this graph does end there. How do you know that? Well, if I looked at the equation, try plugging in 10. So it'd be 4 minus 100. Well, that's a negative. I can't do that. So that's how I know it stops. So I can plug in everything in between here. We're doing domain. I can plug in anything from negative 2 to 2. Can I plug in negative 2? Well, if you're not sure, plug it in and try it. So if I go back to here, can I plug in negative 2? Plug in negative 2, so it's 4 minus 4 is 0. That's okay. You can get a domain. You can get 0 out of a square root. So notice I'm using brackets because I'm allowed to plug in 2. I'm allowed to plug in negative 2, and I can get anything in between there. Now, range, if I look at my equation, or I'm sorry, my graph, notice it doesn't go down here, does it? And it stops up here. So it looks like it goes up and down. Looks like it goes from 0 to 2. Okay. Is there a way I can verify whether I can get 0 and 2? Sure. Look at the equation. So we're going to go from 0 to 2. It's just a matter of whether including. So if I plug in 2, we got 0. So I can close that. if you looked at the graph, where was it up the highest? Right here in the middle, right? Plug in 0. What do you get? 2. So then that's your range. I know the directions didn't say to find range, but we found it anyway. Difference quotient. We're going to do another video on that. Okay, so these are separate videos. Give you a break in between. All right.